This video will explore the significance of the ghosts and spirits in A Christmas Carol and have a little look at Scrooge and the way that the ghosts impact Scrooge throughout the novel. It's important to understand the relevance of ghosts in Victorian society. It is an age that believed in supernatural forces, and although it is an era largely dominated by progression in science and logic and education and engineering, in every advancement there also came a new theory about the supernatural. So the two seem to go hand in hand to a degree. So the point is that Dickens is writing in a context where a belief in the supernatural was very, very real, and he's tapping in to that fascination and interest in the Victorian era. So let's start by looking at Jacob Marley and the ghost of Marley. Well, let's begin with the opening line of the novel. Marley was dead to begin with. Absolutely brilliant opening line. The colon here, I think, is really, really important because it adds the pause. What comes after a colon is additional information. Marley was dead. That could be a full stop, a statement of fact. He was dead at the start of this novel. But the significant bit is that little pause and then to begin with. And immediately Dickens foreshadows the presence of the supernatural in this novel. And we see immediately that ghosts are going to have an impact on it. And Marley first appears to Scrooge in what he deems to be a sort of hallucination of his door knocker. And this is how it's described. Marley's face, it was not in impenetrable shadow as the other objects in the yard were, but had a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were wide open, they were perfectly motionless. That and its livid colour made it horrible, but its horror seemed to be in spite of the face and beyond its control rather than a part of its own expression. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled, or that his blood was not conscious of a terrible sensation to which it had been a stranger from infancy, would be untrue. But he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, walked in, and lighted his candle. He did pause, with a moment's irresolution, before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it first, as if he half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtail sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and nuts that held the knocker on, so he said pooh-pooh and closed it with a bang. What's notable about that first appearance is that Scrooge is reasonably dismissive of it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. His pooh-pooh at the end of this section. He's reasonably dismissive, but it does have an impact, and that's important because the ghosts are progressive in this novel in terms of the impact they have on Scrooge, and there's just a hint here that he has been affected in some way. In that final paragraph, he did pause and he did look cautiously behind. So there is just a glimpse, the start of something affecting Scrooge. And let's not forget, the presence of the ghosts and the spirits is all about change. It is there to change the man, and as Scrooge is a representation of the greedy, money-making side of society, they are there to change society too. That is part of Dickens' purpose in this novel. And he goes inside the house, and this is what it says. He sits down, and yet that face of Marley 7 years dead came like the ancient prophet's rod and swallowed up the whole. So he can't get Marley out of his head. And that reference to the prophet's rod is a biblical reference from Jeremiah. And the biblical reference reads, to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. Now, that reference is really, really important, because if we have a look at the language here, to pluck up and break down, to destroy and overthrow, well, that's very much part of Dickens' purpose here. With the character of Scrooge, he wants to break him down. He wants to destroy his former self. He wants to overthrow the man that he used to be. And society too. He wants to this is all about societal change. And the final bit, to build and to plant. To build a better future, to build a better man, and to plant the seeds of hope and restoration that the ghosts might bring a change in Scrooge, and the audience, through reading that, a change in the audience too, to change their ways for a better society and a better world. Pronoun I here. Marley has taken ownership of this chain. He has recognised that it belongs to him. It defines him. The second here is the use of the verbs I forged. He forged the chain, he made it, and he girded it. This is his own creation, but more than that, it was created with effort. And it really brings home to us the idea that Marley's toil in life was all for nothing. His toil is what has held him back, because it is toil and effort that was misplaced. It was placed upon the importance of monetary gain and nothing else. And then he continues to Scrooge, or would you know, pursued the ghost, the weight and length of the strong coil you bear yourself. It was full, as heavy and as long as this 7 Christmas Eves ago. You have laboured on it since. It is a ponderous chain. So what he points out to Scrooge is that Scrooge's chain is continuing to grow. He is continuing to forge it. He is continuing to labour over it. It is getting heavier and more repressive even than Marley's. And we must consider what Marley's message is here. What is the significance of this ghost? Scrooge says to him, "But you were always a good man of business, Jacob," faltered Scrooge, who now began to apply this to himself. "Business!" cried the ghost, wringing its hands again. "Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance and benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business." You'll notice business repeated a number of times here, and that's to draw attention to the contrast between Scrooge's current view of business and Marley's changed view of business in the afterlife. The most important line here, and this line kind of sums up the message of the novel, mankind was my business. Marley recognises in death, due to the chain that he now carries and the purgatory that he endures, that his business should have been to look after other human beings. Marley was a man like Scrooge, solely concerned with individual gain and individual profit. He recognises and he warns Scrooge, humanity is what we must care about most. That's a key line in the novel. And he warns Scrooge, of course, that he will be visited on the next 3 nights by 3 spirits. And so on the next night, at the time appointed by Marley, Spirit 1, the ghost of Christmas past, arrives. And this is how it is described. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium, which gave him the appearance, having receded from the view and being diminished to a child's proportions. Its hair, which hung about its neck and down its back, was white as if with age, and yet the face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. The arms were very long and muscular, the hands the same, as if its hold were of uncommon strength. Its legs and feet, most delicately formed, were, like those upper members, bare. It wore a tunic of the purest white, and round its waist was was bound a lustrous belt, the sheen of which was beautiful. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and, in singular contradiction of that wintry emblem, had its dress trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright clear jet of light, by which all this was visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using, in its duller moments, a great extinguisher for a cap, which it now held under its arm. It's a curious description, because what we get from Dickens here in this description of the ghost is a series of absolute contrasts, like a child, yet also like an old man. It had a face with not a wrinkle on it, but its hair is white as if with age. And then we get this contrast between strength and weakness. Long and muscular arms, uncommon strength, contrasted with its legs and feet, which are delicately formed. And we get the contrast between light and dark as well, purest white. And we get the contrast between winter and summer, a wintry emblem, and summer flowers. So why does Dickens present us with this series of contrasts? Well, it seems to me that this is a ghost which is there to represent everything and everyone. It is a representatory figure. It is symbolic of everyone in society. It is there to show Scrooge the truth of everything, of society, of the world. So it doesn't represent one thing, it represents an entire community of things. And that is probably why, as we see from the depictions here in various productions and TV and film, that it is depicted in a variety of ways. We've got male and female, we've got young and old, because the description is not definite and is not fixed. But the most significant thing about this description for me is the jet of light. From the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light. While light is often symbolic of the truth. And here is a ghost which has come to Scrooge to show him the truth of his past and to try to get him to change. So I think the light here is a lovely symbol from Dickens of the truth, and it becomes significant when we get to the end of this stave, this chapter, and we'll see what Scrooge does with the light at the end of the chapter. So the ghost describes, he goes and shows Scrooge various events from his past, and he describes them of the shadows of the things that have been. Shadows are a recurring motif in this novel, and shadows are things that follow us. They are almost part of us. They are a reflection of us in a way, and they follow us. So what the ghost is going to show Scrooge are things which reflect his identity, which represent his identity and who he is, and they are things that have followed him throughout his life. That is the significance of shadows here. He shows him the lonely nature of his life at school. He shows him an encounter with his sister Fan, and we see the importance of family there. He gets to see the happiness and joy of Fezziwig's party and of his engagement with Belle, and then he gets to see the bitter parting of him and Belle when he's a changed man. And the ghost begins to have an effect on Scrooge. That's important. He notices, "Your lip is trembling," said the ghost, "and what is that upon your cheek?" Well, of course, that's a tear. So this man who was described as solitary as an oyster, sharp as flint at the start of the novel, is just starting to soften ever so slightly. And in Scrooge's own words, he says, "There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I should have liked to have given him something." A man who offered no charity at the start of this novel now wishes he'd given something. During the whole of this time, Scrooge has acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul were in the scene, and with his former self, he's enjoying the party. And then he asks the ghost at the end, "Take me back, haunt me no longer." So it's significant, the end of this chapter. He is a slightly changed man, but he still wants to dismiss the ghost. We see that in the final stages of the chapter. In the struggle, if that can be called a struggle in which the ghost, with no visible resistance on its own part, was undisturbed by any effort of its adversary, Scrooge observed that its light was burning high and bright and dimly connected. Connecting that with its influence over him, he seized the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. The spirit dropped beneath it so that the extinguisher covered its whole form, but though Scrooge pressed it down with all his force, he could not hide the light, which streamed from under it in an unbroken flood upon the ground. Well, as discussed previously, the light here is a symbol of the truth, and that is all the ghost has shown Scrooge, things that have happened. Notably, Scrooge wants to hide the truth. He seized the extinguisher cap and by a sudden action pressed it down upon its head. Scrooge is not changed enough. He won't acknowledge the shadows that have been. He isn't changed. And he tries to force the light down to hide it, but significantly he can't. And that's important for Dickens' message. The truth is there. It cannot be repressed. It cannot be hidden. Scrooge is going to be forced to accept it as this novel progresses. And then the next night, the spirit too, the ghost of Christmas Present, visits Scrooge. And this is how he is described. Scrooge reverently did so. It was clothed in one simple green robe or mantle bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanour and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust. So what we see in the description here, this is a ghost which is open. Again, this is going to reveal the truth. It is not concealed. Its robe is open to reveal its chest. It's not trying to hide anything at all. It has an open hand. This is a ghost which is going to share again the truth with Scrooge. And significantly, this ghost is unquestionably a representative figure for the joy of Christmas. The shining icicles, the holly wreath, the sparkling eye, the cheery voice, the joyful air. Christmas is, of course, crucial in this novel. It is a time of sharing, it is a time of family, it is a time of celebration, and it acts as a stark contrast to the miserable downbeat nature of Scrooge himself. And so this symbol of Christmas is important in showing Scrooge the other side of life in an attempt to change him. At the end of the description, we get this bizarre description of the antique scabbard, but there's no sword in it, and it is eaten up with rust. Well, if a sword is a symbol of aggression and violence, it is significant that it is missing and that its sheath to hold it is eaten up with rust, because this is also a ghost that represents peace. Scrooge is a man in conflict with the world, and so this ghost sits in contrast to him as a symbol of peace. He shows Scrooge the Cratchit Christmas dinner, and Scrooge is able to observe the Cratchit's joy even in their unquestionable poverty. That scene shows Scrooge the importance of family. He sees the weakness of Tiny Tim, and yet Tim's joy and gratefulness despite his position in the world. And then finally, the ghost reveals the two children, ignorance and want. And it's those two we're going to have a look at now. They are described like this. They were a boy and a girl, yellow, meagre, ragged, scowling, wolfish, but prostrate too in their humility, where graceful youth should have filled their features out and touched them with its freshest tints, a stale and shrivelled hand like that of age had pinched and twisted them and pulled them into shreds. Where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glared out menacing. no change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade, though through all the mysteries of wonderful creation has monsters half so horrible and dread. Scrooge started back, appalled. Having them shown to him in this way, he tried to say they were fine children, but the words choked themselves rather than be parties to a lie of such enormous magnitude. "Spirit, are they yours?" Scrooge could say no more. "They are man's," said the spirit, looking down upon them, "and they cling to me, appealing from their fathers. This boy is ignorance, this girl is want. Beware them both and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it." They have some significance, these two children. Ignorance and want. Well, want is what the lower classes are suffering from. They want, they need, they are poor, they are destitute, they are without. Ignorance is what Scrooge is suffering from. So we see the contrast here. Scrooge is forced to recognise his own faults. Ignorance, he denies. He doesn't know truly what's going on with the working and lower classes. And that is why I think the spirit draws attention to ignorance at the end. Because he says, "But most of all beware this boy, for on his brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased." Scrooge must change. He must get rid of his own ignorance. And society must get rid of its own ignorance if we are going to avoid this apocalyptic future that the ghost predicts. And secondly, again, similar to Marley's message, here the ghost says that these children belong to man, with a capital M, mankind. It is everybody's problem, not just Scrooge's. It is society's job to eradicate ignorance and to eradicate want. And we start to see some progress during this chapter, a change in Scrooge. When the spirit says to him, "Then better do it quickly and decrease the surplus population," he is of course repeating Scrooge's own words from the start of the novel. And Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit and was overcome with penitence and grief. And then when he's watching Fred's Christmas, Uncle Scrooge had imperceptibly become so gay and light of heart that he would have pledged the unconscious company in return. Here is a changed man. And then finally, Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting up his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom draped and hooded, coming like a mist along the ground towards him. So at the end of the chapter, he looks up and he sees the next ghost. But I think that's key, lifting up his eyes. He's not hiding from this anymore. He's willing to accept what this next ghost is about to show him. Here is a man who now wants to change. And so this is the ghost of Christmas yet to come, and it is described like this. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. When it came, Scrooge bent down upon his knee, for in the very air through which this spirit moved it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. Well, first of all, we notice the atmosphere of darkness surrounding this ghost. This is going to show Scrooge something utterly depressing and without hope. It is going to scatter gloom and misery into Scrooge's life. But significantly, it is shrouded in a deep black garment and concealed. It concealed its head, its face, its form. It lacks the openness of the ghost of Christmas Present. And that is important because this ghost is not going to reveal hard facts and truth to Scrooge. It is going to show him what might be if he doesn't change. So the lack of clarity and the lack of openness is important. This is not fixed. It can be changed. And the other thing that's significant is the way Scrooge responds. Scrooge bent down upon his knee. He is subservient to this ghost. He is willing to accept its message and its teaching. He is no longer trying to dominate the ghost like he did with Spirit 1. The spirit shows Scrooge, of course, scenes relating to a man's death. We don't know who the man is at the start, but what's significant, there is no sympathy at all for this man, and they're even mocking him in his death. He then sees the Cratchits, Tiny Tim, and the empty chair. So Tiny Tim is dead. And then finally the spirit shows Scrooge his own headstone and grave, and he finds out that he was in fact the dead man that everyone was mocking. And this has the biggest impact on Scrooge. "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart." That's at the start of the chapter. Here is a man open to change now. Then he says, "Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only?" And this links to that idea of the ghost being concealed. Here are things that can be changed now. And he sees his own headstone and he responds, "Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. And finally I will honour Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present and the future." That is significant. "The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach." Let's contrast this to the way he behaved at the end of Stave 1, where he's desperately trying to shut out the light of the spirit, to shut out the truth. Here he is, "They will strive within me, the lessons will stay with him." He is open to change and open to learning. And so Scrooge is a changed man, and we see at the end of the novel his joyous spirit. And so the message really is, what the ghosts signify is, they show society, the reader, the truth of what's going on around them, and show them the potential for change. If a man like Scrooge can change, then anyone can change. And I'll finish by going back to this reference from about Marley, the prophet's rod, and the biblical reference to pluck up and to break down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. And that is exactly what Dickens has done with the spirits. He has broken down Scrooge, he has destroyed him, and he has overthrown his former self. And now both Scrooge and society, the reader, are able to build a better future and to plant the seeds for a better society.